I dug into serial sperm donor and 90 Day Fiance Love in Paradise cast member Kyle Gordy to find out everything I could about him. Yesterday, I uploaded part 1 to the series, where I talked about Kyle Gordy's appearance on the Dr. Phil show. And today, in part 2, we'll be going over a podcast episode he was on a few years back, where it seems that, for the first time, we get an actual glimpse into the real-life Kyle Gordy behind the scenes. And trust me, it's interesting. So, without further ado, let's listen to the I Want to Put a Baby in You, I didn't choose the name, podcast. By the way, this is an audio-only podcast, so I don't really have a lot of B-roll to throw up. But maybe it'll be me. Maybe I'll just throw up like creepy pictures of Kyle or something, but you probably wouldn't want to see that. The podcast is an hour long, and it was recorded and aired 4 years ago, so keep that in mind. Maybe some things are out of date or have changed, but it starts off with more of his backstory. He apparently got into this 5 years ago at the point of recording 4 years ago, so he's been doing this since he was 22.
I've been donating privately now for 5 years, my sperm.
He says he started this journey of private sperm donating first on Craigslist and then moved to Facebook. And can we just take a moment to appreciate that Craigslist ad? Can you imagine how insane it would be that you're just on Craigslist, you're looking for like a 2001 Ford truck or something, and then you see an ad for free sperm donations, and that some people are clicking on free sperm ads on Craigslist? They talk about what he does for work, and again, at that time, he says he's not an accountant, but that he just does some accounting here and there.
I graduated a while ago. I do some accounting work here and there. So that's pretty much what I do.
Which, again, maybe this is out of date, but that is a pretty stark contrast to what he says on 90 Day Fiance, because he made it seem on the show like he has a full-time job and is like just a normal person that works remotely. But if he's doing some accounting on the side, I mean, does he even have a job, or is this his whole life? And then the hosts ask a bit about his relationships. And here's where it starts to get a little interesting. Kyle says he was never really a relationship kind of person and thought that going this sperm donation route might be the only viable way he could have children of himself.
I pretty much started because I didn't think I was ever going to get in a relationship and have kids myself. So I figured if I can go and, obviously help someone have a kid, and then, obviously I guess it's a kind of a sense that it allows me to have a kid as well.
So he does this because he's not a relationship kind of person.
Some people are relationship type of people, and others, I'm one of those people that I'm just not a relationship type of person.
Which, yeah, seems like a total psycho to me. So that he can have his own kid without having to actually do any of the work, and justifies his no relationship status with, well, most people get divorced anyway, so what's the point of having relationships?
Most people that end up together and have kids end up divorced or they break up anyways. But
it's that point he makes here and will continue to make throughout the podcast that he can now have a kid without any of the drama of a relationship or anything like that.
With me, it's like we were never together, so us having a kid and whatever, there's no drama.
And on the one hand, I get what he's trying to say, but really I don't. Because, yeah, you found a way to have genetic offspring that you can say has your genes, but that's not the same thing as having a kid. This will come up more later, but it's interesting to note that the way he talks about it going forward, I haven't heard a single time that he's made that distinction between having kids and having offspring. Next, they talk about a bunch of legal stuff and talk about the whole child support thing that a lot of people in the comments have been wondering about. He says the first time he did this whole thing, they were just verbal contracts. And because the person had money, that he wasn't really worried about ever being hounded for child support.
Well, we didn't really have any agreement. We just kind of verbally agreed, and they told me what they do for work. I asked them questions. Obviously, I'm not okay, if they said, oh, we don't work, we have no money, obviously I wouldn't donate, but they we got to know each other.
He and the hosts then talk about some various court proceedings and legal precedents that have occurred in this kind of field. Apparently, at least one of the hosts has a law background, so the two of them go on about this whole thing for quite a bit, but Kyle does reveal a few pretty interesting things. Although on 90 Day Fiance, he presents himself like he donates to anybody, in this conversation, at least a couple years ago, he says that he very, very rarely ever donate to a single woman. And it's almost exclusively the case that he goes for people in partnered relationships.
You're right. No, I don't actually donate to a loss. I rarely donate to a single woman.
And at least at the time, believes that's apparently, according to him, in California, if the second partnered person, the non-pregnant person in that relationship, if they agree that they would be acting as the father and take on all those responsibilities, then Kyle believes that he's relatively safe from any future allegations of child support.
I feel like it's kind of similar to Kansas. I feel like if you donate to a couple, and my observation of the law is if I donate to one and the other parent that isn't getting pregnant agrees to be responsible for the child, then that other parent was financially responsible for the child in the future, and that would pretty much free me up from any liability.
And he says that even within those partnered relationships of the people that he donates to, he tends to look for people that are very well financially established and won't have any financial problems in the foreseeable future, which he thinks just further aids his chances of, this will be fine. They're not going to need to ever come knocking at my door.
Like the 20-year-old girl that lives near me, I could just go get her pregnant and have a contract, but she applies for welfare, and then they just go after me and say, well, you got this broke girl pregnant. That's your fault.
He also shares this anecdote where one time he donated to a single woman, and that woman wanted Kyle to sign some sort of contract. And Kyle says that he did not want his actual name on this contract because then this person, just in case something ever happens and she ever wants to go after him for child support, that now she has his legal name and can go find him. So because he was worried about that, he signed it with a fake name and kind of just scribbled over the signature.
And she was insistent I sign a contract. And I was like, no, I don't want to sign a contract because I'm concerned about child support. I didn't end up signing it, but I just, used like a different alias or something because I didn't want to, and I just kind of scribbled.
And I'm no legal expert, but I feel like publicly disclosing that you forged a signature on a legal contract, not a smart thing to say. They talk some more about the legal stuff. Pretty boring, dry, a little over my head, but suffice it to say that Kyle is clearly at least pretty well researched on the topic and does kind of know what he's talking about here. In this conversation about the legal stuff, a big theme with him is that, well, I have established relationships with these women and the families, we go back and forth. We have this Facebook group that he's referencing again. And because I have a good relationship with all these people, that's why I feel more safe that they won't come after me.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of my moms, actually some of them I talk to very frequently. I actually do have a Facebook group for most of my moms are in the Facebook group, so I do get to see pictures.
So let's take a moment and talk about this Facebook group that has most of his moms in it. I do not understand this at all. At least in my opinion, I don't understand what any of these mothers are getting out of this. I don't know, maybe, as I said, I just can't relate. But to me, from an outsider's perspective, whenever you see a large group of women all huddled around together underneath one man who is like leading all of them, and then you introduce like sperm and pregnancy and a kind of savior, like, oh, you gave me a child. Red flags. Very harem-y, little culty to me. The hosts ask him about getting any STD tests, and he says, yep, I get those all the time to send to the women. And then he mentions that he's been trying to ship his sperm to people.
But I just feel like I need to start shipping because everyone that wants my sperm is far away and not everyone wants to pay for my travel. So maybe I'll buy like one of those liquid nitrogen tanks in the future and have like a mass supply of sperm, like 20 things of sperm stored up in my freezer and just...
Man, how dystopian does that sound? Can you imagine a world where you just go on some kind of like Amazon marketplace and just shop around for your favorite sperm and then you order it and it just shows up at your doorstep the next day?
I actually have an extra bedroom at my house where I have all my shipping supplies, ice packs in the freezer, and I have this stuff called TYB. It's called test joke bookers.
And now, halfway through the podcast and having many discussions about the legal ramifications and how to freeze and ship sperm and the chemistry of all that, I think it's time to point out something that I've noticed, which is Kyle seems a lot more articulate and well-spoken here than anywhere else I've seen him. They're referencing court cases, liquid nitrogen, different legal jurisdictions. It's not crazy complicated, but it certainly leaps and bounds ahead of the dumbass, well, Americans don't do etiquette bullshit we've seen from Kyle on 90 Day Fiance. I'll talk about that more later at the end of the video, but for now, I just wanted to bring that up and so that you can keep that in mind and try to listen to it as I play more clips. Back to the podcast, we're halfway through and Kyle is asked again a bit more about his background.
So first off, tell me a little bit more about your background. Kind of what about your background tends to appeal to recipients, or what information do you provide out there that they see?
This is all, of course, according to Kyle, and some people on the internet and Reddit have pointed out instances where he may not necessarily be the most reliable narrator, but at least according to him, he got good grades in school, his dad is a lawyer, his granddad was a nuclear physicist, he has an identical twin brother who has some PhD in computer science and works for the Department of Defense, which Kyle takes credit for, by the way, that PhD, and says that, well, because my identical twin brother got a PhD, then I've also got a PhD.
I don't know if that's that impressive. It was the highest GPA in my graduating class out of a few hundred people program there. But I mean, I always look at it this way. Me and my twin have the same genes. So if my twin has a PhD in computer engineering, it's like me having a PhD in computer engineering. So,
which, I don't know, sounds like a very Kyle thing to say. And when asked by the hosts why he thinks that people like to choose his services over other private sperm donors, Kyle says one of his biggest draws is that he's free.
Yeah, but although if I think about it now, I don't think people really care about the education that much. I think the real reason people use me is because my sperm is free.
And while I totally understand that people with less money should have access to fertility treatments, fertility treatment shouldn't be exclusive to people that have $20,000 laying around. I do feel like if you know that your clientele are people that are going to you because you're free and might not have as many financial options as other people, I feel like you then have to be extra aware of any potential power imbalance. I mean, if I was in his position and I knew that a lot of people coming to me were coming to me because I was free and may not have the means to go and seek other options, then I should be aware that that might imply some kind of desperation. Which, I guess when you think about it, when you get to Kyle's sperm, then you really are scraping the bottom of the genetic barrel. But wait, taking a step back, didn't he say earlier that he's usually going after people that have a lot of financial means because he's looking to shield himself from child support? So he's either looking for extremely cheap rich people or something doesn't add up. The hosts ask Kyle about his motivations and
yeah, and I know we briefly touched on your motivation. I feel like people kind of may question that just because, you're not earning any money from it. And of course, this takes a lot of time, especially if you're traveling. So tell me more about your motivation.
Then it gets really interesting because Kyle says that he's never really been interested in a relationship, but he does get a kid out of this.
I'm probably not getting a relationship and have any kids. So I think it's best. I think this is another alternative. It's like,
and also revealed that a lot of his motivation came from him imagining himself old and alone and wishing that he had kids.
It's like, I think, a regret kind of thing. Like, let's say I didn't do this and I just grew old and I'm like 60. I'm like, oh, I never had any kids. I think it has a lot to do with that. Like, at least I did it. You know what I mean?
But again, you can have genetic offspring. That's not the same thing as having an actual child and grandchildren that you have actual relationships with. Can't speak for everyone, but I imagine when most people say that, I wish I had people around and invest in my relationships and have kids so I'm not alone for the future, they mean actual children, not, oh, I know that I have some sperm floating around in the universe. You can have all the offspring you want. You're still going to be alone at 60. You're kind of missing the point. But I don't know, maybe it doesn't make sense to me because I'm thinking about it too much like from the human normal person perspective. I guess if we remove all like the relationships and emotion and love stuff and what makes life worth living and leave it at just genetic procreation aspect and be all psychopathic about it, then I guess it makes more sense. But even then, I don't know, because then he talks about how one of his kids in this group chat calls him daddy. And because of that, that's his favorite kid.
One of the kids actually calls me daddy. He's actually my favorite kid.
Which is terrifying to me that he has so much interaction with these kids that aren't actually his, that one of them calls him daddy. I mean, that does not sound healthy for that child. But also, along with that whole psychopathic hypothesis, which is just a hypothesis and just my opinion, if he doesn't actually care about love and relationships and all that, and just wants to be old and think about the power of having the genetic offspring, then why would he like it when a kid calls him daddy? Because when I hear him say all this, it does at least remind me of someone that may have had lots of relational traumas in their life and real bad family upbringing, and they might then believe, well, real love doesn't exist. I'm just not a relationship person. That ship has sailed for me, but still wants a child and still wants it for altruistic reasons and wants to have that connection, and may have found this route in life as a way to achieve those kind of attachment and desire for child dreams without having to address the core wounds of his damaged relationships. Just to be clear, I don't think that is what's going on with Kyle. I think Kyle has a lot more problems that are a lot more pressing, but still, if he is some kind of psychopath or, on that spectrum or dark triad, why like it when a kid calls you daddy? That wouldn't make immediate sense to me, at least from an attachment perspective, but might make more sense if we think about it from a power perspective. Like, he hears a kid call him daddy and he's like, yes, I am the daddy. You are all my offspring. Like, I have all the power, I wonder too if there may be a small kind of like cuckold thing, where maybe if that kid has two parents, in that relationship, and he's thinking like, yeah, they're not the daddy, I'm the daddy, finally I can cuck someone else instead of being cucked myself. I don't know, maybe that's a stretch, but it seems like he would be the kind of guy to get off on that. And I mean, look at him. You think an incel looking guy like that isn't relishing the opportunity to feel any sense of power, like he's not the one getting cucked for once? Anyway, that was kind of a long rant. Back to Kyle's background. He says again that he's never done any genetic screening, but would if anyone asked him to and paid for his tests.
I've never done any genetic testing, but I am open to it. If anyone wants to pay, I don't know how much it is, like a few $100, $300 or something, I'm happy to pay. I'm happy to go get it done. But no one's ever told me to do it, so I've never done it.
So that's another interesting approach that completely bypasses any sense of personal responsibility. Kyle, don't you think you should get the testing for you and the kids? Like, it's only, if the woman wants it, then like, fine, I'll do it, but I don't care at the end of the day. He's asked, for example, if he may be a cystic fibrosis carrier, and Kyle's answer is, yeah, probably not. I don't think I'm a carrier because, I'm just probably not. I don't think I am.
Do you know things like if you're a cystic fibrosis carrier?
I would say probably not.
Again, this is the guy who thinks he has 125 IQ. They talk some more about some sperm bank news, and I guess at the time there were a few little controversies about sperm banks either messing up the vials or some kind of system being taken advantage of. And Kyle uses these news stories as an excuse to further blame and discredit the validity of sperm banks and fertility clinics.
If it makes you, feeling better, there's been a lot of scandals with sperm banks, and there's a guy with Zytex.
That's very true.
Zytex had a guy, and I think it was 12 out of the 36 kids have schizophrenia. So really, you can make an argument and say, well, what's the difference between a sperm bank? They're obviously not doing a very thorough testing if there's kids coming out with issues,
And while Kyle does have a point, these news stories did happen, I don't know if he sees these and further validates that, yes, that sperm banks really are bad and uses it to justify his position to himself, or if he really doesn't care about it at the end of the day and it's just a convenient smokescreen to hide his true intention of getting more people to buy into him and his services. I don't know. I have my opinion. I'm sure most of you do as well. And finally, at the end of the podcast, the hosts ask him pretty directly, what do you get out of this?
What do you feel you get out of donating?
And Kyle answers pretty honestly, I get a kid out of it. He says, well, I can say I'm being perfectly altruistic about it, but at the end of the day, I have to recognize that I get a kid out of it, and that's pretty cool.
The thing, what I get out of it, I get a kid out of it. I could obviously say, well, I'm altruistic, I'm doing this, but in reality, I am kind of getting a kid out of it.
And while he could have meant that in a kind of Machiavellian, mocking the idea of altruism at all, it also kind of sounds like he's just being humble and saying, well, I could pretend that I get nothing out of it, but kids are really cool and that's awesome. And, I do get something out of it. So anyone who says that, they don't get anything out of it, they're just lying. This is a cool thing to do. Still doesn't answer what exactly he gets out of having a kid. What kind of emotional need is this filling? Is it the offspring thing? Is it a power thing? Does he actually like having a quasi relationship with them because that's the only kind of relationship he's ever going to have with other people? At the end of the day, why does he do this? And lastly, the hosts ask him about any mental health screening or concerns.
Have you ever been through a mental health screening or counseling?
Kyle says no, he hasn't done any of that kind of screening, but points out that one advantage that people have going with him over sperm banks is that these people can talk to him and meet him and get their own feel for what Kyle is like. Whereas at the sperm banks, you don't get that. Everyone's anonymous and all you know is if they've been diagnosed with XYZ, not the feeling of the whole picture.
And they can see how I am in general. Like I said, when you go to a sperm bank, you don't get to see that kid, so you can't evaluate their mental status to see if they're crazy. But in this case, the woman can talk to me and they can see for themselves.
And he even accepts that he has his personality. Maybe some people like that, but not everyone is going to vibe with every personality. So some people will meet him and not like him, and he says that's okay. But as long as the women have an opportunity to get to know him, then everything is fine.
Obviously, everyone's not going to be perfect. Obviously, everyone has different personalities. And there's some people like, well, I don't like that guy. I think this guy, he's just not my type.
And that's the end of the podcast. So what did we learn about Kyle today? I hope you noticed by the end of me playing all those clips what I mentioned earlier about him seeming a lot more well-spoken and well-versed. Again, he's not some genius, but he's clearly more educated and well socially adjusted than he appears on 90 Day Fiance 4 years later. In fact, he actually jokes along pretty well with the hosts, and I get the impression that by the end of the hour-long conversation, the hosts even might kind of like him. And guys, if I'm honest, if I didn't know anything about Kyle, and this was the only exposure I had to him, I might buy into it too. I mean, clearly I'd have some red flags about just what kind of person would do this at all and what kind of ethical boundary, and all that. But judging him purely based off how he presented himself in this interview, he does kind of have a certain charm to him. Very casual, kind of goofy, not too serious. Also pretty effortless, not over the top or overly weird. And that combination of impressions I have from him kind of all come together and give me kind of a sense of harmlessness about him. When I watch these kind of people, or really anybody in the world, I don't just pay attention to the judgments I have in my mind about a person, like goofy or cordial or whatever. I also pay attention to how I feel. And when I listen to this podcast, I get a small feeling somewhere that this guy, he's harmless. This guy's not evil, he's kind of weird and maybe he fell into a kind of weird hobby in life, but yeah, he seems to know what he's doing and, he eats well and doesn't smoke and drink and stuff. He's probably harmless. To be clear, I don't believe that about Kyle. I'm just sharing that in this interview, there was a small feeling of that. And I wonder if that is the similar feeling that other women may experience with him before they meet him in person. They want a sperm donor. They reach out to him, talk to him on the phone in this situation, and may walk away feeling kind of comfortable. But then they go and meet him in person, and something is clearly off.
I did put my trust in Kyle because he knows exactly what to say and how to say it over the phone. But it's the meeting him in person and actually sitting down and spending time with him that you realize something with this guy is very, very off.
And I'll just include here for no particular reason, I just happen to, in my mind, remember that a lot of psychopathic and narcissistic people can be quite charming and convincing people that they are innocent, and may be very good at lulling people into a false sense of security so that they can be more easily preyed upon. Obviously, I'm not saying that's what Kyle does. It just popped into my mind for some reason. Another thing we've noticed from these episodes is that Kyle seems to have a pattern of not taking accountability, like on Dr. Phil with meeting the kids, or not even seeming to care or even consider what might be best for the child. He seemed to only be interested in what would get him in trouble, and if he follows the parents, then he's not responsible. Or with this whole genetic testing thing, where yeah, maybe some people haven't asked for it, or maybe they're okay with him having not gotten the test, but at no point did I ever get any impression that he actually cared about the ramifications of possibly spreading a genetic heritable disease. again, like with meeting the kids, it seems like he's thinking, well, the other woman agreed to it and I'm not going to get in trouble for not doing it. And that's the end of it. I don't care. I don't care about what I might be spreading. I don't know. I don't give a shit. As long as I'm not on some kind of legal problem side of it, then who cares? And maybe the biggest example of him not taking any accountability, what does it say about a person where hundreds of people, not just haters like me, but actual experts, doctors, clinicians, researchers, all share the same sentiments and concern over his actions, and he just doesn't care? Because he doesn't claim some kind of counter arguments that, well, actually the incest thing, you guys are over-representing the problem. It's not actually a problem. And if it was, then I would care. No, he doesn't deny that that would be a problem. He just says that, yeah, all these incest and damage to the generations, from here to come. I have a Facebook group, it's whatever. How does he not care at all? Because at this point, it's clear to me from watching all these interviews, Kyle is smart enough to understand the problem. Kyle knows this is risky. He's not stupid. Okay, well, he is really stupid, and I made several videos talking about exactly how stupid he is, but he's not an idiot, is what I mean. Well, okay, I guess he's an idiot, but you know what I'm trying to say. He has multiple aliases online to protect his true identity. He protects himself from child support, knows just enough about the law to avoid any major legal problems. He knows what he's doing. He knows the risks, and he doesn't care. That's my conclusion from watching these 2 episodes, at least. Thank you all for supporting the channel and for the amazing growth we've seen over the last few weeks. I haven't officially mentioned it in a video yet, but we recently hit 10,000 subscribers the other day, which is just mind-boggling to me. Thank you all so much for that and for everything else. A big thank you to all of you channel members for helping support this channel and making these videos possible, with an extra special thank you to Nancy Jones for being a producer of this channel. And until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you later.